I'm Bernie Decastro, Chairman of the Constitution Party of Florida. On July 4, 2011, 230 years after the Declaration of Independence and 224 years from the signing of the U.S. Constitution, the greatest political document ever conceived, Time magazine's cover showed a photo of the U.S. Constitution that had been shredded and asked the question, does it still matter? Today, I want to talk to you about one of the most dangerous threats to the U.S. Constitution and America's sovereignty. It's called Agenda 21, otherwise known as Sustainable Development. There was a time when some could dismiss Agenda 21 as the ravings of a conspiratorial nut job, but there is now so much credible evidence on this blatant threat to America's sovereignty that it can no longer be denied. Agenda 21 has been such a well-kept secret that I would venture to say that maybe 1% of Americans have heard about it. Isn't that amazing? I was amazed at how something so potentially cataclysmic to our American way of life could have been so well hid from the American public for almost 2 decades. Then I began to realize that this was a two-sided problem. One side represented the effort to keep Agenda 21 under the radar for as long as possible, but sadly the other side had to be attributed to the apathy and complacency of the American public. While we were busy chasing the almighty dollar in pursuit of the American dream, interspersed with our insatiable need to be entertained, Agenda 21's diabolical scheme was stealthily and rapidly being deployed by the United Nations and the elite internationalists. Using the United Nations as their front organization, the fear of global warming as their boogeyman, and the mainstream media as their pitchmen, they began an aggressive public relations and marketing campaign. Agenda 21 was sold to an unsuspecting, uninformed, and gullible public under the guise of benign-sounding phrases such as environmental initiatives, smart growth, social justice, livable communities, public-private partnerships, etc. Here's a quote from J. Gary Lawrence, a planner for the city of Seattle, Washington. Participation in a UN-advocated planning process would very likely bring out many who would actively work to defeat any elected official undertaking local Agenda 21. So, we will call our process something else, such as comprehensive planning, or growth management, or smart growth. My fellow Americans, if we do not immediately rise up and resist this diabolical assault on America, within the next 2 decades, America will cease to be a sovereign nation and the cause of liberty will have been extinguished. Before explaining Agenda 21, I want to take the time to acknowledge that much of the work that has gone into this report was taken from these 2 documents: The Ultimate War, Globalism versus America, and Understanding Sustainable Development, Agenda 21 by Michael Shaw of Freedom Advocates. I would also like to acknowledge the work of men like Dr. Michael Kaufman of Sovereignty International and Tom DeWeese of the American Policy Center. Most of what is known about Agenda 21 today is directly attributable to these men and others like them who've dedicated their lives to fighting this treasonous attack on America's sovereignty. So what is Agenda 21, you ask? The introduction to the official United Nations document, Agenda 21, states that Agenda 21 stands as a comprehensive blueprint for action to be taken globally from now into the 21st century by governments, United Nations organizations, and independent sector groups in every area in which human activity impacts on the environment. This blueprint for action will be implemented through what is called sustainable development, a benign-sounding catchphrase which actually translates into tightly regimented regulation over all human activity. In a nutshell, Agenda 21 is the abolishing of the right to own private property. Not only that, all in the name of sustainability, it severely limits the rights of Americans to grow their own food and to fish American waters. This is amazing. At the 1992 Rio Earth Summit, Maurice Strong, former Undersecretary General of the United Nations, puts it like this: "It is clear that current lifestyles and consumption patterns of the affluent middle class involving high meat intake, consumption of large amounts of frozen and convenience foods, use of fossil fuels, appliances, home and workplace air conditioning, and suburban housing are not sustainable. A shift is necessary towards lifestyles less geared to environmentally damaging consumption patterns." What we are talking about is two diametrically opposed philosophies. According to our Declaration of Independence, all Americans are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And it is the purpose of government to protect the unalienable rights of each individual. According to the UN Declaration of Human Rights and Agenda 21, the Creator, God Almighty, doesn't exist. He is replaced by government, who grants, restricts, or takes away your rights according to its needs. You and the product of your labor belong to the community. Our founding fathers knew and understood that government was a necessary evil that had to be restrained, and so they gave us the Bill of Rights, which were a list of freedoms that were sacrosanct and government could not infringe upon. Agenda 21 is a concerted effort by the financial, political, and academic elite of the world to form a new world order, a one world government with one world currency. Let that sink in, folks.
We have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order.
This is otherwise known as globalism, and globalist philosophy is now deeply entrenched in all levels of American government. Whether they think of themselves as socialist, Marxist, or communist, these individuals all have one thing in common, and that is to negate the political recognition of the individual's unalienable rights to life, liberty, and the use of his property. Make no mistake about it, friends, the battlefield of the modern world is over the political recognition of unalienable rights. Prohibitive zoning, open space mandates, resource extraction limitations, conservation easements, and use prohibitions, coupled with enforcement provisions of such thing as the Endangered Species Act and the various wildland bills, are all designed to chip away at the idea of private property. America cannot stand if the idea of private property is not protected. As George Washington said, private property and freedom are inseparable. And yet, the United Nations position on land ownership is clearly the opposite. According to Agenda 21, land is to be held or controlled by government and its partners, not individuals. Through the formation of the United Nations, the World Bank, the World Trade Organization, and the Bank of International Settlements, working in conjunction with nefarious international organizations such as the Trilateral Commission, the Council on Foreign Relations, and the Bilderbergs, an infrastructure for centralized world government has been established. We are now within the grasp of the global governance. I did not vote for Obama, and I'm no fan of his, but make no mistake about it, anyone who thinks Obama is calling the shots is seriously deluded. Obama is simply their puppet, just as the last four presidents have been in regards to Agenda 21. Not about Republicans versus Democrats. Both political parties are absolutely complicit in this global scheme to destroy America's sovereignty and make the radical shift to the New World Order. They have both supported nationalized education policies that increasingly have indoctrinated our youth into rejecting the concept of unalienable rights and embracing the global citizenship mantra of Agenda 21. Sustainable Development's short Bible, called the Earth Charter, is, believe this or not, taught in American schools. Its authors are Stephen Rockefeller, Maurice Strong, the former Undersecretary General of the United Nations, and get this, Mikhail Gorbachev, the last president of the Soviet Union. Unbelievable. Each of the authors has proclaimed that the Earth Charter is to replace the Ten Commandments. Both political parties have supported new economics, public-private partnerships in place of free enterprise, and both parties are advancing social justice in place of equal justice. Both parties have spent America to the brink of economic disaster. They both support essential tenets of globalism, meaning they both support the United Nations Action Plan for World Government through Agenda 21, Sustainable Development, which uses environmental protection as its excuse for transforming our systems of justice and economics. If you question the complicity of both parties in this diabolical scheme known as Agenda 21, then simply ask yourself this one question. When was the last time you heard a member of the U.S. House of Representatives or a U.S. Senator mention one word about Agenda 21? In fact, not even Glenn Beck wanted to touch that subject. In watching his program for over 2 years, I only heard him briefly mention it one time, and that was during his last week on the Fox Glenn Beck program. We're talking about a program that was unveiled by the United Nations in 1992 at the Rio Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro. The leaders from 178 nations attended, including President George H.W. Bush, and they all adopted Agenda 21 and pledged to evaluate progress made in implementing the plan every 5 years thereafter. On June 29, 1993, Bill Clinton signed Executive Order 12852, establishing the President's Council on Sustainable Development. Today, 18 years later, after President Clinton signed that executive order, sustainable development has permeated the entire United States, and it is now in over 660 cities and counties. The United Nations, working together with local, state, and national government and many NGOs, that's non-governmental agencies, have formed a network of public-private partnerships for the purpose of implementing Agenda 21. Get this, 2 of the more prominent NGOs involved in implementing Agenda 21 are the Chamber of Commerce and the American Planning Association. That's right, I said the Chamber of Commerce. Who would have thunk it? More and more lands across America are being put off limits as people are increasingly forced into high-density, so-called smart growth communities. Vast expanses of land have been taken from the American people and locked up from any use under what is known as the Wildlands Project. Several sheriffs have recently and lately demonstrated courage to stand up to these rogue federal agencies, and at the conclusion of the video, I'll provide you with their names so you can do your own research. Not only is the government illegally confiscating private property, but for the last 2 decades, they've been severely restricting resource extraction from American waters. In other words, the concept of marine protected areas began to come to the attention of fishermen around 1993, soon after the Earth Summit. And according to Florida boat captain Sid Prescott, a friend of mine, who's been studying Agenda 21 for years, this has led to a trade deficit in seafood imports of around $8 billion. Today, if the seafood eaten in America, about 80% of it is imported from places like China and Vietnam, and most of it is raised in filthy cesspool farms, and none of it is even regulated by the FDA.
Do not meet international standards. In 2009, Vietnam exported $4.5 billion worth of seafood, including catfish.